Imagine this. It's June 1942. For 6 months, the Imperial Japanese Navy has been an unstoppable force, sweeping across the Pacific. From Pearl Harbor to the Dutch East Indies, their victory seemed absolute. The Allies were on the ropes, and a sense of dread hung over the United States. It felt like Japan couldn't be beaten. But in the vast blue expanse of the Pacific, near a tiny atoll called Midway, the tide of the entire war was about to turn in one of the most dramatic and decisive naval battles in history. So, how did a seemingly outmatched U.S. Navy pull off a victory that would cripple Japan's naval power forever? It's a story of intelligence, courage, and a heavy dose of luck. Our story really begins not at Midway, but in the code-breaking rooms of Pearl Harbor. After the devastating attack in December 1941, U.S. cryptanalysts, led by the brilliant Commander Joseph Rochefort and his team, were working tirelessly to crack Japan's naval codes. They were listening in on thousands of encrypted Japanese messages. They knew Japan was planning a massive operation, but they didn't know where. The target was codenamed AF. Rochefort and his team had a strong hunch that AF was Midway, but a hunch wasn't enough to convince the top brass in Washington. They needed proof. So they devised a clever trap. They instructed the U.S. garrison on Midway to send an unencrypted radio message reporting that their freshwater distillation plant was broken. It was a gamble. If the Japanese were listening, they'd take the bait. They did. Just a few days later, U.S. intelligence intercepted a Japanese message stating that AF was short on fresh water. That was the smoking gun. Admiral Chester Nimitz, the commander-in-chief of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, now knew exactly where the Japanese were headed. He had the what and the where. The when was soon to follow. This priceless intelligence, Nimitz started to move his chess pieces. Japan's plan, devised by Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the architect of Pearl Harbor, was incredibly complex. He aimed to lure the remaining U.S. aircraft carriers into a trap and destroy them, effectively ending American naval power in the Pacific.
Yamamoto's force was massive.
Over 200 ships, including 11 battleships and 8 aircraft carriers, split into multiple groups. The main carrier strike force, the Kido Butai, was the same elite group that had attacked Pearl Harbor, featuring 4 veteran carriers, Akagi, Haga, Soryu, and Hairu. On paper, they were invincible. Against this armada, the U.S. had just 3 aircraft carriers, the USS Enterprise, the USS Hornet, and the USS Yorktown. The Yorktown was a story in itself. She had been heavily damaged just a month earlier at the Battle of the Coral Sea. Japanese estimates said she'd be out of commission for months. But at Pearl Harbor, shipyard workers performed a miracle. In just 72 hours of frantic round-the-clock repairs, they patched her up enough to sail into battle. This ghost ship would play a crucial role. Nimitz knew he couldn't match the Japanese ship for ship. His only advantage was surprise. He positioned his 3 carriers northeast of Midway, lying in wait, completely undetected by the Japanese fleet, which was sailing with radio silence, confident that their plan was a secret. On the morning of June 4th, 1942, the battle began. Japanese planes took off from their carriers to bomb the American base on Midway Island. The American defenders fought back fiercely. Marine Corps pilots, in their outdated Brewster, Buffalo, and Wildcat fighters, rose to meet the superior. Japanese Zeros. They were completely outmatched, and most were shot down, but their sacrifice bought precious time and disrupted the Japanese attack. The Japanese strike leader, Lieutenant Joichi Tominaga, radioed back to his commander, Vice Admiral Kichi Nagumo, that the Midway defenses were still strong and a second strike was needed. This single message would set in motion a chain of disastrous decisions for the Japanese. At this moment, Nagumo faced a critical choice. His planes were armed with land attack bombs for the second strike on Midway. But his scout planes had just spotted American naval ships, the American carriers. The ultimate prize. According to Japanese naval doctrine, you always prioritize destroying enemy carriers. This meant rearming his planes with armor-piercing bombs and torpedoes, a chaotic and time-consuming process that had to be done on the crowded hangar decks. So, Nagumo gave the order, rearm the planes for a naval attack. The decks of the Japanese carriers became a scene of organized chaos. Bombs, torpedoes, and fuel lines were everywhere. As they were in the middle of this delicate operation, the first wave of American planes arrived. These were torpedo bombers from the Hornet, Enterprise, and Yorktown. Flying low and slow, they were sitting ducks for the Japanese Zero fighters and anti-aircraft fire. The attacks were a slaughter. Of the 41 torpedo bombers that took off, only 6 returned. Torpedo Squadron 8 from the Hornet was completely wiped out. Every single plane was shot down, and only one man, Ensign George Gay, survived floating in the water, a lone witness to the unfolding drama. It seemed like a total failure. They didn't score a single hit, but their sacrifice was not in vain. By drawing the Japanese fighter patrols down to sea level to intercept the low-flying torpedo bombers, they had left the skies wide open above. And at that exact moment, diving out of the sun, came the American Dauntless dive bombers from the Enterprise in Yorktown. They arrived at the perfect moment of Japanese vulnerability. The Japanese carriers were in the middle of rearming, their decks littered with explosives, and their fighter cover was out of position. It was a pilot's dream. In the space of just 5 minutes, American bombs slammed into 3 of the 4 Japanese carriers. The Akagi Kaga and Soryu were turned into raging infernos. The bombs ignited the fuel and munitions stacked on their decks, creating massive, uncontrollable explosions. They were doomed. In less time than it takes to drink a cup of coffee, the heart of the Japanese Navy had been ripped out. One Japanese carrier, the Hiryu, survived the initial onslaught. She quickly launched her own planes, which managed to find and severely damage the USS Yorktown. But American scout planes soon located the Hiryu. Later that afternoon, dive bombers from the Enterprise and Yorktown took off for one last strike. They found their target and hit her with 4 bombs, leaving her ablaze and helpless. By the end of the day, all 4 of the elite Japanese carriers that had attacked Pearl Harbor were at the bottom of the Pacific. The loss was catastrophic for Japan. They not only lost 4 of their best carriers, but they also lost over 250 aircraft and, most importantly, thousands of their most experienced pilots and maintenance crews. These were losses they could never replace. Japan's industrial might couldn't compete with America's. While the U.S. could build new ships and train new pilots relatively quickly, Japan could not. The Battle of Midway completely shifted the balance of power in the Pacific. Japan's offensive capability was shattered. From that point on, they would be on the defensive, fighting a losing war of attrition. The victory at Midway allowed the United States to seize the strategic initiative, leading to the brutal island-hopping campaigns at Guadalcanal, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa, and ultimately to victory in the Pacific. It was a battle won by breaking codes, by taking calculated risks, and by the incredible courage of the pilots who flew into almost certain death. The sacrifice of the torpedo bomber crews, the miracle repair of the Yorktown, and the perfect timing of the dive bombers all came together in a pivotal moment that changed the course of World War II. It remains one of the most studied and admired victories in military history. Thanks for watching. If you found this story of courage and strategy as fascinating as I do, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into history's most important moments. We'll see you in the next one.